Dear students, today we will study about Galileo Galilei, which is prescribed in the third BCA English course under the Bangalore City University syllabus. This is for 30 marks, so you have to be very cautious about this. And I will be discussing about the life of and achievements of Galileo Galilei and how he challenged the old Aristotelian theory and he supported the Copernicus theory. Galileo Galilei, having an open mind or getting someone else to open up their mind to a different point of view is a hard work. It is very difficult that to establish some new theory and does not support the old one. The Galileo affair from the 17th century has some classic lessons and some do's, but mostly don'ts on how to get someone to change their perspective, especially when the change in question is a radical one. Galileo's trial. He was tried by the church. The year was 1633. Galileo stood on trial in front of Inquisition, a powerful office within the Roman Catholic Church, charged with vehement suspicion of heresy. Galileo's crime. He had published a book proposing that the sun, not the earth, was at the center of the universe. If confirmed guilty, his punishment would be severe. Mathematician Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake for espousing similar views not long before Galileo's trial. The Goldfish, to avoid the fate that had befallen his predecessor and the realization that his audience did not probably was never going to have an open mind. Galileo's survival instinct kicked in. He swallowed his pride and pretended he had been only hypothesizing and that his opinions were false. At this trial, he acknowledged, I must altogether abandon the false opinion that the sun is the center of the world and immovable, and that the earth is not the center of the world and moves. Galileo Galilei, having Galileo went on to say, with sincere heart and unfeigned faith, I abjure, curse, and detest the aforesaid errors and heresies, and generally every other error, heresy, and sect whatsoever contrary to the said Holy Church. And I swear that in the future I will never again say or assert verbally or in writing anything that might furnish occasion for a similar suspicion regarding me. Upon hearing the 180-degree turn from Galileo, the Inquisition agreed to lighten his sentence. They agreed to reduce his sentence punishment that he has backtracked from his stance. Galileo, already 69 at the time of trial, spent the rest of his life under the indefinite house arrest ordered by Pope Urban VIII. Additionally, he had to seek repentance for his heretical thoughts by reciting the seven penitential psalms weekly for a few years. He died a sad man 9 years later. Heliocentrism. In his book Great Feuds in Science, 10 of the liveliest disputes ever, Hellman describes how Galileo, a devout Catholic himself and a father of two daughters who became nuns, had never intended to go against the church. On the contrary, when he found sufficient evidence for heliocentric theory, helio, the Greek root of for sun, at the center, he merely sought to protect the church from having to defend itself in the face of mounting evidence. So, why did the authorities respond so intensely to Galileo's suggested philosophy? What was the big deal about a physics theory almost costing Galileo his life? To answer, let us rewind the story a little bit with help help of Arthur Hallman. It began with Ptolemy. Ptolemy and Copernicus. Ptolemy, born in 100 AD, believed that the earth rested at the center of the universe and that other celestial objects such as the sun, moon, Venus, and Mercury circled the earth. The earth at the center theory messed with what people observed with their naked eyes, the sun and moon seemingly moving around us in the sky. Moreover, Ptolemy theory correlated nicely with the religious ideology that the earth is only place for imperfect beings such as mortals, and that perfect eternal heaven in the form of other celestial objects is all around us. We simply have to find a way to get past the temptations, corruptions, and tragedies that bog our earthly lives to reach those celestial bodies. Ptolemy's theories were steadfast for centuries until Polish astronomer and mathematician Copernicus proposed an alternative. Based on his observations and findings, Copernicus advocated a new theory that the sun, not earth, is at the center of the universe and that celestial bodies rotate around the sun not because angels make them do it, but because it is their nature. Looking for evidence, Galileo was convinced of Copernicus' model of the universe but realized he had need to produce evidence to justify such a radical theory. Serendipitously for him, a Dutch eyeglass maker, Lippershey had just then invented a device that could help magnify objects to three times their size, what subsequently became the modern telescope. Galileo, who had heard about the Dutch perspective glasses, built his own telescope that could magnify images 20-fold. Then he pointed his magnifying device skyward. The rest, as they say, is history. Galileo saw craters on the Earth's moon and the dust like planetary rings, evidence that went against the prevalent views of perfect heavenly bodies. More importantly, he saw enough evidence to convince him that the sun, not the earth, was at the center of the universe. This meant he had the inviable job of reconciling his telescopic observations with the somewhat contrary language portrayed in the scriptures. And so Galileo decided to write the book Dialogue on the Great World System, Ptolemaic and Copernicus, not foreseeing that it would eventually land him in front of the Inquisition. Had Galileo's book Dialogue been a dry piece of technical writing or in more uncommon language Latin, it may not have ruffled as many feathers. But the book was lively, entertaining, readable, and encouraged discussion. Also, it was written in Italian, a more widely accessible language. Galileo wrote dialogue as a series of conversation between the three characters. Salvati, representing Galileo himself, Sagredo, a neutral moderator, Simplicio, the opponent, represents the prevalent mindset, a composite of opposing views. Throughout the book, Salvati builds the case for why the Earth, not the Sun, is the planetary body in motion. One key argument is that movement of water on Earth, a phenomenon everyone could see and therefore agree with, is caused by Earth's motion. Though this was disproven later, tides that make water are caused not by Earth's movement but instead of gravitational forces from the moon. On the other hand, Simplicio's counter argument in book seems weak. He accuses Salvati of speculation and trying to interpret divine wisdom. He declares that if God wanted water to move, he could have done it in many ways, not necessarily just by making the earth rotate around the sun. Galileo's misplaced optimism. Galileo believed he could convince the church of the heliocentric theory through dialogue without reproach because he had, at least in his mind, a cordial and intellectual relationship with the church leader Pope Urban VIII. Galileo in his early days was a student at the University of Pisa. There he struck a friendship with Maffeo Vinzio Barbini, a fellow student who later became Cardinal Barberini and eventually the Pope of Roman Catholic Church, assumed name Urban VIII. After assuming the papacy, however, Pope grew skeptical of Galileo's theory, realizing how the theory would upend established church doctrines and contradict revered scriptures. But even more critically, Galileo forget that Simplicio's arguments in dialogue were actual papal arguments. So it almost seemed like Galileo took pot spots at the Pope, the Church, and its doctrines through his book. Of course, Pope Urban VIII found his personally downright insulting. And that is how a supposed friend turned into a foe. The result, Galileo was howled in 1633 before Roman Inquisition, where he was forced to eat his own words. It was not until 2 centuries later that the Church allowed heliocentrism to be taught. This entire episode, popularly referred to as Galileo's affair, has been a study of case study for how to and how not to introduce ideas that radically change the status quo. And even if the ideas are not groundbreaking, here are some takeaways from the Galileo's affair on how to have an open mind. How to have an open mind. While Galileo's affair is a fascinating read, it has some important lessons for us to having an open mind when new ideas are concerned. These lessons are especially relevant today in a world where we are all stuck in our own bubbles and echo chambers. What is in your index librum prohibitorum? Not, I am not making up high sounding words. Until it was formally abolished in 1966, a section of the Catholic Church maintained a list of books writing Catholics were forbidden to read. This was referred to as the Index Librum Prohibition, literally meaning list of prohibited books. Books deemed arithmetical to the church culture, political, and theological views were consoled and made the list. Not surprisingly, the list of banned authors features some of the brightest and most curious minds of our times from wide ranging fields such as literature, philosophy, and science. Descartes, Voltaire, Pascal, Kant, Milton, and of course Darwin. Their crime, they thought differently. The truth is that each of us has our own index, not just of prohibited books, but ideas, thoughts, and people we refuse to engage with because they are so out there. But are why we put off what we consider other? Is it insecurity? Do the ideas threaten our beliefs and values? Acknowledging and discovering why we avoid what we avoid is the first step to developing an open mind. Understand three stages of truth. All truth passes through three stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as being self evident. German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, when Galileo and Copernicus before him proposed heliocentrism, they were initially ridiculed because the theory went against the very grain of accepted wisdom at the time. People simply laughed it off. But when Galileo started collecting evidence to prove his assertions, the reaction was swift, wild opposition for fear of disrupting the status quo. It only took 200 years for the tide to turn and for heliocentrism to be adopted as the norm. Keeping an open mind means being open to the possibility of change in our opinions, perceptions, and beliefs. And it is often hard to adapt to change. Knowing and accepting the possibility that, like 5 stages of denial, any new truths will take their time to go from ridicule to acceptance is the only way to be peace through the change process. Pope Urban VIII felt so insulted for being portrayed as Simplicio in Galileo's dialogue that we never forgave Galileo. Upon Galileo's death in 42, his patron, the Grand Duke of Tuscany, wanted to hold a fitting public funeral and erect a monument to commemorate Galileo's contribution to humanity. But the Pope was vehemently opposed to this idea, so the remains of the greatest scientist minds lay hidden in the church bell tower basement for over a century until they were finally moved to be near the tombs of other Florentine greats, Michelangelo and Machiavelli. The lesson is this: if you had liked someone to have an open mind about an idea, it would help immensely not to insult them personally. We humans are rational beings and will always find it hard to separate ideas from people. Evaluate the quality of your information. While this is not directly tied to Galileo affair, it is nevertheless a vital attribute to keeping an open mind. Keeping an open mind is essential, but being able to separate fact from fiction is even more so. If you don't read the newspaper, you are uninformed. If you read the newspaper, you are misinformed. Mark Twain. What Twain said was tongue in cheek, but it is indeed better to be uninformed than misinformed. Being uninformed simply means you are not exposed to new information, but you still have the capacity to learn. On the contrary, when you are misinformed, you have already bought into some ideas. It is much more complicated than keeping an open mind and changing tracks, especially if it involves admitting you were gullible to believe the wrong idea in the first place. Finally, keeping an open mind means learning to break a mold you may have carefully constructed all your life. It can jarring and may even result in an existential crisis. But the truth, as they say, will set you free, even if it takes a little while or 200 years, as in Galileo's case. Thank you. This is about the life of Galileo. He did a great job in establishing the scientific theory that Earth is fixed and the other celestial stars, moon, revolve around the sun. So this theory was established by him. He paid a heavy price for it. He faced the inquisition by the church. He was punished, but later people believed that this is what he told was the correct thing, and today he is remembered for his invention. Thank you, students.